Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Where Owls Know My Name by Rivers of Nihil.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Sorry if I'm sounding kinda tired in this video, and that's because I'm tired. Yeah, I just am a bit tired, but I want to make this video, I want to get it done with, and then we can move on to the next one. But anyway, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So it has been quite a while since we've had any extreme metal album on this series, and the last one we had was probably Obscure by Gorgut. But when you come to think of it, Gorgut did actually make a death metal album. They're a death metal band. This one is extreme progressive metal, so it means it's technically lighter than death metal, but honestly, you know, when it comes to these types of harshness and heaviness, I really can't say there's a huge difference in my opinion. And today's album is called Where Owls Know My Name, and it's by the Rivers of Nihil. They come from the USA. Now, for those of you who like etymology like me, you should know that the word nihil is actually the Latin word for nothing, and from it comes the word nihilism. But anyway, this album was released in 2018. Now, over on the Prog Archives, this album actually has the lowest rating out of the 4 albums they have in their discography. Now, I wouldn't go to say that this is actually their worst album, because as well as having the lowest score out of them all, it is also the one with the most, let's say, impressions or reviews on it, because their other albums have 6, 7, and 11 reviews on them, while this one actually has 32. And if there's one thing we all know, is that an average is much more accurate as you have more people participating, and when not a lot of people review certain albums by theirs, the review is kind of biased, and the few people that actually review these other albums are probably big Rivers of Nihil fans, which give them great ratings. And knowing that has helped me in looking at this album in a different light, because if I were to look at it without thinking outside the box, I would have thought that this is their worst album. But seeing as this is the only occurrence of an album by this band on the list, I guess I'll probably never know whether their other albums are as good or worse or better than this one. So if anyone watching this video is familiar with Rivers of Nihil and know their discography, I'd love to hear what you have to say about all their releases, or at least partially about them, down in the comments. But yeah, as I said, this is an extreme metal album, and it goes to great lengths to actually feature that sound. And it does that by featuring some of the well-known extreme metal tropes like growling or 16th notes bass drum beats, or, you know, distorted guitars, or a lack of creativity on the bass. I'm not kidding with you, just the bass isn't the strong suit of most extreme metal bands. And while most of this album falls to the mindless grind of actually making, you know, pretty contemporary metal music, if you might say, and not really thinking outside the box to create something new, there are certain points on this album when they take a step back, they change the pace, they change the sound of things, and they actually create something which is much more interesting. And whenever you add a new element into the music, it really helps to contrast the very mindless metal, extreme metal that they create throughout most of this album, and I love that contrast. I love when bands, let's say for example Between the Buried and Me, when they do their very heavy sections, but then they have the lighter sections, the more interesting sections to contrast these two together, and I think this is what River of Nihil does best, but unfortunately they do it very seldom. And their surprising factor that they add into a song to create that that contrast usually is the saxophone. Much like yesterday's album Novella by Renaissance, we also taken a look there at a song called Touching Once Is So Hard to Keep, and that song has added the saxophone into it, which was not expected by any means, but did add a lot. And this album, whenever it adds the saxophone, also gives it just a bit more zing, if you'd like to call it, and I think it sounds a whole lot better with it. But the funny thing is about the saxophone on this album is that it's not even played by any of the band's members. It's actually played by a studio musician called Zach Strauss, and he does a fantastic job at doing it, but I feel kind of bad saying that the best instrument and best player on this album is not even a band member to begin with. But I digress. The certain songs on this album that actually have that change in pace, which I really liked, are The Silent Life and Subtle Change, which has a big descriptor in the brackets after it, but I don't even want to get into trying to memorize it. I really like the way they're structured, and they're also very loyal to the extreme metal genre, but they have this contrasting factor which I really find enjoyable, and I specifically like Subtle Change more than The Silent Life just because it's a bit longer and we get more time to enjoy this very interesting experimental way of creating extreme metal. But unfortunately, when it comes to the rest of the tracks on this album, there's really nothing that interesting about them. They have the classic extreme metal tropes and they're not really all that unique. I guess for people who do enjoy this type of music regularly, this would be a fantastic album to listen to, but to me, I didn't find a lot of things interesting about it, and mainly and most of all, I didn't find a lot of things progressive about it. But I was pleasantly surprised to not suffer through this album. I actually had a pretty good time listening to it. Like, it was pretty fun. It wasn't, exciting in many ways. There were some mediocre tracks, but overall things were pretty fun to begin with. Now I'm really happy for it because the fact of the matter is, before I started this series I really didn't enjoy any metal music, and now I can go on and listen to Obscure by Gorguts, which is extreme death metal, and quite enjoy it. So to finish things off, I'll say this album has a lot of potential on it, and you can actually see the potential. It's not like something imaginary that I'm thinking about that, yeah, maybe if they did this and this, then maybe they'd have more potential in the songs. No, the ones that I mentioned to you are actual good tracks. They could be better, yes, but I think if the entire album was like these two, it would have been a whole lot more enjoyable. And the question being asked is, why not add more instruments rather than just having the saxophone? Because in all honesty, I think that a lot of other instruments could have added a lot more creative textures to this entire album. So take for example Light of Day, Day of Darkness by Green Carnation. That album has one song which lasts for an entire hour, and I think the way that they do that well is by adding a lot of different motifs and instruments and singers, and they just create this plethora of sounds which sound really good. And with all of that, I think this album could have been fantastic and very much more enjoyable to listen to. But for now, that's all I have to say about this one. It has a lot of potential, and hopefully in the future I'll get to listen to more of Rivers of Nihil because they do have a promising sound. Okay, this is a pretty sick ass cover. The thing I really like about this one is the fact that it doesn't really convey what you'd expect from every death metal, extreme metal album. It actually looks kind of calm, it's kind of somber, and there's something very macabre about it, and I really like that. And at least to me, the emotion that really oozes from a cover like this is desertion. Everything about this cover just screams like something that once was brilliant is now gone. So we see this tree figure, which if I'm not mistaken is called an ant, with its barkley-like skin with a lot of decaying creatures on it, but instead of feeling like it's supposed to shock you, this thing is actually quite making me sympathize with the suffering of this figure. And the color palette on here is just on point. I love when covers and pieces of art use a combination of shades of green and purple. I think it looks pretty brilliant. And I think this is the point where I should tell you just a bit about the artist who made this cover. His name is Dan Seagrave, and he makes fantastic covers for a lot of metal bands. He made some for Gorguts even, and he has so many things. And I went online and I looked at his website at its gallery, and he has a bunch of different things, but I think the thing that really impressed me on there was not actually the covers he made, but two collections of drawings he made called Bodywork and Becoming Ghost. Those two, they're actually painted on canvas, I think in oil paints, and they look pretty amazing, and they might not be the perfect material for cover arts for albums, albums, but they're very interesting, so for anyone who appreciates good physical art, you should definitely go ahead and look at that. Now, this album could have been better for the reasons I already mentioned, but for now I think it's getting a rating of 6 out of 10. By the way, excuse me for the dogs in the background, they've always been in the background and I try and do my cuts in between so you wouldn't hear them, but if you've noticed anything about them in the background, just know that they're fine and I'm just really trying my best for them to not be featured in the videos. But that's about it guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Permanent Waves by the band Rush. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.